Welcome to the Retiring Real Estate Investor Podcast, where we will discuss how to defer taxes on the sale of your property, earning passive real estate income, and everything you need to know to go from active investor to passive investor. Join us as we interview passive investment sponsors, explore the journey of other retiring real estate investors, and share our due diligence process we perform to select passive investments. Investment advisory services provided by Insight Investment Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. This podcast is only intended for clients and interested investors residing in the states in which we are registered to provide investment advisory services or exempt from registration. Please contact us to determine if the firm provides investment advisory services in the state where you reside. All content on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Material presented is believed to be reliable sources, and no representations are made by our firm as to another party's informational accuracy or completeness. Insight Investment Advisors, LLC and its representatives do not provide tax or legal advice, and nothing herein should be construed as such. Always consult with your tax advisor or attorney regarding your specific circumstances. Welcome to another episode of the Retiring Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Bruckman. We've given my co-host, Josh Wright, a day off. But no days off here for myself. And we've special guest today, Stuart Berryhill. Stuart, welcome to the podcast.
Yeah, Brandon, excited to be on. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. There's so many, Stuart and I were talking a little bit before we started. There's so many different ways that we can go here with what you're up to in your background, Stuart. I'm going to let you sort of introduce yourself to our listeners. Give us some feel for where you are and where you've come from, and sort of where you're at on your journey.
Yeah. So I am from Little Rock, Arkansas. That's where I currently live. And asking what I do can be kind of a loaded question. So I'll try to be as quick with that as I can. The long story short right now is I'm an insurance agent by day. Now I work commission, so I have a lot of control of my time because, if I don't sell anything, I don't make anything, and it doesn't hurt the boss. And so full commission. So it's almost like a small business. You could think of it that way, doing insurance. And I specialize in multifamily. So one thing that's nice about that is I'm pretty networked in multifamily. So that helps the business side of things. And I think networking is much better than prospecting anyway, but that's a whole different topic. But that's what I do right now. And then I'm a real estate entrepreneur is how I like to put it. So my brother and I, we tackle different projects. We've done fix and flips, not really into that because, the goal is cash flow and passive income. And so in Little Rock, I like talking about the stuff we have more equity in because I'm a general partner and limited partner in some syndication deals in Augusta, Georgia. And I could give you all the units and things like that, but I like talking about the ones we have more equity in. And so we have 30 units right now in Little Rock and Hot Springs, Arkansas. And we do Airbnbs. And so my count's wrong. 21 of those are Airbnbs. I say the count is wrong is because we just closed on a 12 unit a couple months ago that we're renovating and turning that into 14 units. And that's going to we're turning it into all short-term rentals. And that's in Hot Springs, Arkansas, very touristy area, super excited about that play. So really scaling the Airbnb side of things or short-term rentals. If I just say Airbnb because people affiliate that with what we designate as a short-term rental. So that's what we're doing right now. And we got 30 units under contract. And this is kind of the third year I've been doing this. Before that, I graduated from University of Arkansas and was a teacher, a high school teacher and a basketball coach for 5 years coming out of college. Got out of that because wanted financial freedom. And I actually wanted financial freedom to be able to coach basketball because I really enjoy coaching basketball and doing that journey. But as a private school teacher, not making more than, not even making $500 a week, life is tough. So financially, but last year of teaching, I actually started developing a high school financial literacy curriculum because that's a big passion of mine as well. And now I actually do a podcast called Money Vision U. And the tagline is the financial class you should have had in high school. So that's aimed at 16 to 24-year-old, college students, young adults. And so a bunch of my old high school students actually listen to it and they talk real estate with me or what stocks or cryptos going on, things like that, just business in general. And so that is the real passion play. That is what I would call the hobby, talking financial literacy with young people and coaching basketball. But the job right now is insurance agent. Don't mind it at all. and just building the real estate portfolio for the passive income side of things. So that's all the cookie jars I got a hand in right now.
More cookie jars and hands for sure. For sure. So take us down. Let's
Uh-huh.
go kind of backwards. Maybe I'll take it backwards, forwards. So take us down the passion side of that with the podcast. Because I think, I'll be honest, a lot of listeners, if I have a lot of 16 to 21-year-old listeners, I would be very surprised at that. But I think a lot of the folks listening, especially the retired real estate investor, has kids or grandkids that could definitely
Exactly.
benefit from getting this education. And I know from speaking with our current clients, they are desperate to pass this knowledge that they have about, frankly, how to make money to their children. So talk some more about how you're approaching that.
Yeah, well, I do. Yeah, so it is aimed at 16 to 24 years old. So I know this is the retiring real estate investor, so probably a little bit older and more mature of an audience, wiser audience for sure. So you may have kids, young people that you're around. First of all, young people I think are hungry for this, especially if you teach it in the right way. You can't be a boring teacher, but like to me, business is not boring. Playing Monopoly in real life, talking about trying to build a multi-million-dollar business, that ain't boring. And all kids want to be rich. I can tell you that. And so I think kids are more interested than people realize. If you're trying to pass down that knowledge, pass down that wisdom, one thing I like to say in the podcast is, we always talk about how there's 5 asset classes and, real estate, crypto, business, paper assets, and commodities. But an asset, the definition, at least by Robert Kiyosaki's terms and whatnot, the definition of an asset is anything you invest in that puts money into your pocket. Well, by that definition, I would call education an asset class. The only difference is the cost is not necessarily money; it's a different currency, and that currency is time, which young people have more of. And as you start to retire and have retire because you have passive income from real estate, you can invest more of your time into maybe kids or whatever, because you're not just passing down a real estate portfolio. A lot of people pass down real estate portfolios, and I actually see it as an insurance agent. And sometimes it just doesn't end up going anywhere because they don't have the education. So just as important as passing down a real estate portfolio is passing down the education on how you acquired that and how you built a business, because that's going to be what's going to make it generational wealth that lasts multiple generations and not just one generation where it could get blown. And hopefully it doesn't happen that way. But there are stories of people, blowing a trust fund or blowing whatever money was handed down to them. And I look at that as the same as a lottery winner or the same as an athlete who got into a sport, got a 7-figure payday, and then it's all gone in a couple of years. What happened? They had the money. They didn't have the financial literacy. And if you want to be able to multiply your money, it requires financial literacy. You can't just have it handed down to you. That doesn't work in the long run. And so that's one reason it's a big passion of mine, because I want people to be able to have multi-generational wealth. Because when I think you have, to me, financial freedom is not just freedom, and you talk about this, I'm sure, but it's not just, freedom with money, but it's freedom with time. And those are the two currencies that are most important. And time is actually more valuable, which I'm sure everyone talks about. But, when you have more time, you can give that more and more to younger people and, pass on the knowledge and the education that they need to be able to sustain and multiply that wealth. Because my dream for people that listen to me is to be I want them to be wealthier than me, and I don't have kids right now, but, when that day comes, I want them to be 10x wealthier than me. And, hopefully I can give them a great starting point, but I want them to be able to think even bigger than I even thought was possible.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, so many important things you said there. And if I think about about the two currencies, and this is a big thing that we're working on with our clients all the time, is they are looking for the currency of time. And that's what we're trying to provide them. I think more importantly, though, is that they do look around the corner. And I can speak, I have 3 children, so I can speak from this personally, is I want exactly what you said for your children, for my kids. I want them to take a step up. Because when we look at the statistics on wealth and wealth transfer, I'm sure you know these, by the time we hit generation 3, most of it's gone. Most of it's gone. And I've seen that history actually, through our family, as we had a relative who did a really deep study on our family before all these fun websites about your heritage and stuff. You went and did the real
Yeah.
actual work. And you could actually see it through the generations of where the wealth would leave our family because of the way that you were able to collect those records. So I actually watched this happen in real time
Interesting.
to our family. I'm like, man, I don't want that to happen anymore. So this is the key component, because I think a lot of folks spend their time that are in the seat of maybe our listeners, the retiring real estate investor. They're like, hey, how do I pass on as much as possible? But that's not good enough. As you pointed out, it's how do I pass the knowledge too? So what a great place to our listeners should be putting this podcast in their kids and grandkids' ears, that you're putting out there, and should be learning that. And you mentioned the tagline of your podcast was the class they didn't teach you in high school.
Right.
Do you really think this should be part of high school, or is this education that folks should really go seek on their own? And if it is part of high school, how do we make that content valuable for them and interesting?
Yeah. So one thing interesting is I know high schools are trying to do some sort of financial literacy curriculum at the public school level. Some private schools, I think, have a little bit more than probably in their curriculum than others. And I think even maybe this is just the state of Arkansas, but I was visiting with someone the other day, and I think they require 1 credit or 1 semester of econ. What's interesting to me, though, whenever I think government teaching economics, I kind of hit the pause button, though. I kind of like, whoa, because what government class is going to teach you on how to not pay taxes through like bonus depreciation and cost segregation and real estate? Probably not going to happen. Then on top of that, politicians, I don't know what to tell you, a lot of them have not run businesses. And so they can be great in the sense of education and have different skill sets there, but you're not going to be able to necessarily teach someone how to become wealthy, okay, that's okay. Let's at least get people not diving into bad debt. But for me, my opinion is financial literacy, if it should at least be a core subject, if not the center of all core subjects. That's my opinion, because 1, it's interesting. The worst question I ever got as a teacher is, when am I going to have to learn this? Okay. That was a question that sucked to answer as a teacher. Like, it's not fun to answer. Oh, you're building good habits. You're doing this and that. You're not going to like doing everything. Okay. First of all, that's a totally valid question. And often, side note, it's probably your future entrepreneurs that are asking that, because education right now, what's it train kids to do? Probably to be university professor robots. That, like, your best students, we are training them to be, we're not telling them to be creative. We're telling them to follow orders. And so they become great university professors, which is great. Need those. But there's an element that's a student or population that's not who they are. That's not what they want to be. And I think financial literacy, 1, can help you see different options. Like, this is a statement some people may not agree with, but you don't have to go to college to be successful. I think people overestimate what a college degree does and underestimate what hard work and entrepreneurship can do. And so financial literacy being incorporated, if it's at least a core subject or center of core subjects like math, talk about a profit and loss statement, look at tax returns, look at a paycheck and the taxes being taken out and how it may vary by different states. Analyze a real estate deal, analyze business, see what spending X amount on a credit card is going to cost you in interest payments over a year if you only pay the minimum. In English, maybe read Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I'm all for Shakespeare. I don't know how that helps me right now, but read your Shakespeare. That's great. But at least tie in some sort of finance book in there and do a study on that. In history, let's talk more about things that happen financially that are very important. Like when in 1971, was it Richard Nixon took the US dollar off the gold standard, and now we have this thing called inflation that can happen where savers become losers because you're holding on to a depreciating asset, or called a liability, in the dollar that falls into the paper asset class. So I think financial literacy should be tied into those core subjects, if not its own core subject, because 1, I'll say this too, when you're financially literate, it's empowering. It doesn't become, what can other people do for me? How can they make my life better? You start to have, if you're like inside of a fish tank, it becomes an ocean. The more of possibilities, the more financially literate you become. And right now, I think we can see that with the American dream. In my opinion, the American dream has shifted for my generation, millennials and Gen Z, from what can I build to how can other people take care of me? To me, that's not financial literacy. When you're financially literate, which is what a lot of, your generation, older generation ultimately was, they wanted to build something. They didn't want people to take care of them, because when you can build something, you can build something much better than what people can always give you or something like that. And so there's a lot of reasons I believe in financial literacy, but I think high schools should definitely help out. Maybe you don't get into deep business talk, but at least understand the implications of getting in bad credit card debt, or not paying rent, or spending more money than you've got in your bank account, and things like that, and learning how to budget, just understanding taxes, have a CPA talk, things like that. You have to know that stuff as a US citizen. You got to know how to pay your taxes, and you need to know a little bit about what's going on. And so I think it's a lot more valuable information than the questions that kids ask following, when am I ever going to use this? I think we need to teach them stuff where we can say, you are going to use this
today. When am I going to use this? Right now.
Right.
Absolutely. Right now.
Exactly.
Is when you're going to use that in a high school class. What a great way to maybe start that course because I was that kid who was asking that. And I was a kid wondering why we were reading Shakespeare. I didn't quite understand why I was doing that at the time. So a great point, not to just have that class, but to really intertwine that with the other subjects, because man, the history of finance is really the history of the world. That's tied into almost every major historical event that you're going to talk about in that class anyways. Why not shine a light on the economics of those events as well? That makes a ton of sense.
The financial implication. I mean, look at World War II. I mean, why was Germany able to be subject to a dictator like Hitler? Well, it was some of the financial implications from, I'm going to forget the treaty now, but the Treaty of Versailles, I think it was called, where it just, the Germans, they couldn't, it crippled them so much to where a dictator could take over. So there's finances that can be taught without history that created these historical events that we, study and talk about.
Yep. I was never taught that. I was taught, the dates. I'm sure you were too, the dates, the events that happened, but missing on the why. And the why is that economic component that would be really helpful to sort of intertwine into that. And I know schools are trying, but it is going to take a long time to kind of tilt that wheel to a place that matches our modern economy. Because you're exactly right. Schools have that same sort of setup. I'll say controversial things here. I don't care. So the schools have that same sort of setup that they had when they were founded, and that was to train workers. And that was a very valuable thing to do when they were founded. We're beyond that. It's a different economy that we live in. And man, what a path of abundance we have too. So why not teach folks to put their hands around that? So that's awesome. So I think people should be definitely listening to your podcast. We're going to link that up into the show notes to make sure that our listeners are sharing and listening to that as well. So they can find better ways to pass on this legacy. I know I want to. I know I'm gonna make my kids listen to it because man, that's one of my big giant goals for myself is to have a legacy. And kind of pass it on.
And I'll say this too with the podcast. The structure of it is, if I'm teaching, so sometimes I'll just teach something. Or like my recent episode was, I think it was called "It's Just Business: Why the Live Tour is Able to Challenge the PGA Tour." And just talking about it's two businesses, and so I've talked about that. But then I've talked about, the 5 different asset classes and, whatever it is, the 4 different ways to make money. But I also have guests on. I'll have guests on that are like CPAs. So my recent CPA, he came on and he just broke down the taxes in a paycheck. So how many 16-year-olds get their first paycheck and they're like, where the heck did my money go? Oh, it's just taxes. Okay. What taxes am I paying for? Because now, when they hear, we're going to pay $10,000 in student loan debt for everyone with whatever quota. Now they may think, okay, I can see where my taxes are going to be affected on the federal level. So that helps the financial literacy there. But I also, what's really cool, Brandon, is I have young people on too that are talking about cool stuff that they've done. So I've had a 17-year-old on who he closed on a duplex when he was 17 years old. His story is really cool on how he switched from Instagram to Zillow. And when he was 15 years old, completely changed his spending habits, saved $18,000 in 2 years.
Wow.
just went to work. His budget was like $40 a week, and that was gas and maybe one Red Bull, is what he says. And that was a complete 180. And this 180 happened because he met someone in real estate. Probably a lot of your listeners could be this spark for young people when they see, whoa, look at the passive income this guy has. He's not having to work. He can, do whatever he wants. And that was essentially this young kid's spark. That it was this 30-year-old who quit his 6-figure job because he had more money coming in passively through his real estate investment. So that was his trigger. And so now he's like 18 years old with 8 units. Really cool. Not going to college. He's just owning real estate and growing his portfolio and being a property manager right now. He may go to college in the future, but we'll see. I've got a 25-year-old who's been on who he has a cleaning business now making $50,000 a month. I've had a 21-year-old on who's in real estate, a 19-year-old on who's in college house hacking, which I think is something that, man, I wish I would have gone back and done that house hack when I was in college.
I was house hacking. I was house hacking. I didn't even know it. Right?
Yeah,
it would have been much more efficient for us to own that building.
Exactly. And so, I've had a 20-year-old on who in their dorm room, they had a spray tan business. I mean, little things like that you never know if they do spray tan business long-term and whatnot. I mean, all they got to do is lease whatever building and add some more units and boom, you got a bigger business. And you just figure out the numbers, which she's already kind of figured out her margins and things like that. So I do have younger guests on too, which I think is super motivational for people rather than just hearing, the 40 and 50 years old who have spent their time investing their money, investing their time, who are at a cool place now. That seems really far away for a high schooler.
You think there is a big gap there about like how to get started? Is that one of the big, call it maybe mental roadblocks that young people have is, okay, they do, as you said, they see somebody who's in their 40s and they're like, well, that's not who that's going to take forever to get where they are. But to see someone who's 19, does that change things a lot for folks?
I think it's true that there probably is a roadblock but part of it's financial literacy of, only this person in this socioeconomic class can do this, which is not true. So there can be a mental roadblock on, I definitely don't want to call it the victim card, but for lack of better terms, I'm not in their position, what's that?
Would you call it belief systems?
Yeah, belief systems, maybe that's a good way of putting it. But so there's that financial literacy block. But what I have found, like a lot of the people that I know that have ended up, or young people that I know that have ended up wanting to do something, there's something that gives them a spark. For the 17-year-old, it was meeting that guy who was 30 years old, doing, his real estate stuff, quitting his job, his high-paying job to do real estate. The one who did the cleaning business, he was in his office at 22 years old. He was already hungry for just being wealthy. He didn't necessarily know what he wanted, but he just wanted to be rich. And he was like, man, I see all these other people in the office. They're like 50 something years old. I'm a single dude and they got families and they're here 7 p.m. He's an engineer, late at night. And he's like, I don't want that. And so that gave him a hunger. Some people's spark is literally just rich dad, poor dad. I mean, and that makes them want, or just opens their eyes. And so there's like a beginning, I guess, spark that I like, that I've commonly seen in young people or anyone on the journey to get them started into getting past that, I guess, mental barrier of, oh, I can't do it. Well, if they see someone else from their, call it socioeconomic status or class or whatever it is, doing something cool at a young age, that can be a spark of, oh, and I actually think social media helps that. TikTok, Instagram, things like that. If you search for it, you can find young entrepreneurs doing cool things. And entrepreneurs are starting to become, I think, more and more rock stars than it used to be with things like TikTok and Instagram is something that I've noticed. It's cool to do that. And so I think that actually helps it. But yeah, I guess long story short is I think there's a spark that happens for people, whether it's meeting someone, reading a book, an encounter, a moment, something like that, where it produces this lifelong journey of financial literacy and financial freedom. And that ultimately is what I really hope Money Vision U, my podcast, can be for young people.
There you go. Exactly that, right? You're creating you're hoping to create as many sparks as possible with some of those exposing some of those stories, so that folks can see it. No, that is awesome. So we're definitely going to link that up. Make sure our listeners check that out. Let me spin you a little bit and talk about the real estate projects that you guys are working on. It seems like there's a couple different buckets there you're looking at. You're looking at short-term rentals. It seems like there's a desire to produce cash flow out of those.
Yep.
How do you think about whether you're going to spend your time or your capital against the short-term rentals versus maybe a buy and hold versus maybe another passive investment that you're participating in? How do you think about where to spend your time and energy?
Yeah, good question. So my whole goal is passive income. It's all about financial freedom. It's all about which equals cash flow. And I say on my podcast, the more financially literate you become, the more your investing aligns with your goals. And I actually think that I see a lot of syndicators, because I've kind of been in the space 3 years now. So I see what a lot of people start to do, and they start to chase these 3 to 5 year flips. As a general partner, as a limited partner, that's great. Although you will have to go find another deal. But as a general partner, to me, that's the same thing as flipping a house. It's just a longer process, 3 to 5 years. So for our real estate projects, like we're not looking to sell. We're holding, and I'm not investing in a 401k. I'm not investing in an IRA. I used to. I'm not currently, because my strategy's just changed. I want to be wealthier much earlier than 60 years old. 2, my wealth could come from real estate dividends via cash flow. And then if I want to sell the real estate when I'm 60 years old, I can, and that'll probably have appreciated pretty good. Let alone I'll be continually adding to the portfolio, or I can just hold it and it can keep cash flowing either way. So our goal is just cash flow. So we buy and hold, with determining whether we're going to Airbnb or long-term rent the property. Whenever we buy, we always make sure it works as a long-term rental first, and then Airbnb can. So that's, I guess, a plan B, and then Airbnb is bonus. And this Hot Springs one, it would work. Now this Hot Springs one's a little bit different because we're like all in on the short-term rentals. It's kind of like a boutique hotel. Feel pretty darn good about it. It would actually work as a long-term rental based off comps in the market and kind of where we bought it. But if that one ends up being a long-term rental, we'd probably sell it just because it's not really aligning with where we're wanting to go. But for the most part, we're just looking for cash flow. So that's why we do the Airbnb, because it's more cash flow, and it can be just as passive as, long-term buy and hold or a long-term renter, real estate. If you have a long-term tenant in there, you're just building a business. And so it's a form of property management, I guess. And so we're kind of meshing the business asset class with investing in real estate by doing Airbnb, which I view as business, and just leveraging the real estate to earn more cash flow while that real estate's appreciated. And you're appreciating that asset more because you're technically raising the net operating income. So it's going to be valued at a higher price. So I don't know if I think that kind of specifically answers, or I think that kind of answers the question of kind of our strategy. It seems like is what you're asking essentially there. We're just buy and hold real estate.
Yeah, no, that makes a ton of sense. And I think the tidbit that I pulled out of there right away was you make sure that it works as a long-term rental first, and then the short-term rental or Airbnb is a bonus for what you're doing. That's very interesting. Except I obviously mentioned that specific project that's got a short-term rental focus on it. But it's interesting that you'll play between those two different asset classes. I don't see that very often. It's pretty smart when you're just looking at probably looking at the market. What will the market bear and give for that two different types of renter? What's the most profitable, and we'll chase after that, right?
Yeah, we're seeing what the comps are. We're seeing what one comps long-term rentals, and then the other comps Airbnb rentals. Now that we have more in certain areas, we kind of have a pretty good idea of what things are going to rent for. Some of them we've just kept long-term because it's definitely it's just easier. And we don't think the margins would be enough to give the effort and buy the furniture. That's another cost. It takes some time to recuperate. But, so some we've just kept long-term rentals because the cash flow wouldn't be really hardly any different, let alone the effort. And we think effort may be better used elsewhere. But yeah, we look at the comps and then also the location and kind of analyze what we think it will do and if it's going to be worth I guess, the effort, because there's a little bit more expenses on the Airbnb side for sure.
Mhm.
So we just kind of weigh the pros and cons of each one. But when we buy, we have in mind, oh, this could work as an Airbnb. And then if we don't end up
Mhm.
doing, we don't end up doing it. But we definitely
Gotcha.
keep that in mind since we've kind of built the infrastructure of the Airbnb business.
And talk about a little bit of the markets you're investing in. You mentioned Hot Springs. I think that we're looking at from our side, we're looking at markets nationwide. I don't think Hot Springs showed up on the radar. I bet it doesn't for a lot of people. And
No.
I'm also guessing that probably creates some opportunity.
Yeah, so Hot Springs interesting. So my brother's stuff, it's all in my brother and I's stuff, it's all in Little Rock and Hot Springs. So we got 12 in Hot Springs, and I guess that makes 18, and then we have 30 under contract in Little Rock, and
Mhm.
then 7 of those are Airbnbs currently. But we just know our backyard well. So Little Rock ain't a sexy market, but we know the pockets to be in, and so we kind of pinpoint those on the Hot Springs side. So with same as Hot Springs, you can find real estate not as it's still competitive, but it's not as competitive as, I don't know, Dallas, Texas, or Phoenix, or something like that. With
Mhm.
Hot Springs, we've actually really liked Hot Springs. I really like the idea of attacking Hot Springs because no one's going to invest in Hot Springs based on, like, if you're looking for population, where it's going, and rental demand, you're probably not looking at Hot Springs, Arkansas. Not much population there, maybe 30 or 40,000 people, but highly touristy city. You got a
Mhm.
lake, you got a massive horse track with a casino. It's technically a national park. So you have a lot of people doing that. It's got a nice downtown that's very historic, like Al Capone, Babe Ruth, all them, used to be there and stay there. So a lot of history there. And so it's actually kind of interesting because you can buy real estate kind of on the cheap and then leverage it to make X amount more with Airbnbs, which is the higher demand anyway. Because I think last year in Hot Springs, there was over 2 million tourists. This is a city of
Wow.
30 or 40,000 people. So
Okay.
highly touristy.
There's a
Another,
metric that'll catch some attention right there. That
yeah.
metric will
And
catch some attention.
yeah, highly touristy. And with that, the regulations, they've been out for a while. The city, which is one thing you're always watching out with Airbnb. Now this one's commercial, so we're good either way, since it's a commercial zone property. But if someone's doing a lake house or something like that, it's pretty easy to understand with the regulations, and they're not going to be changing them because they've been there for a while. So, and at this point, it's kind of strict with the single family stuff. But we really like the commercial idea, attacking the commercially zoned properties and neat little areas in Hot Springs, Arkansas, because shoot, we underwrote this one thinking it can get a base rate of $99 or something like that, and we only needed 60% occupancy. But now we're changing that from 12 to 14 units, so that occupancy percentage technically does not need to be 60%, and we think we're going to be able to have a base rate much higher than $99 based off our renovations, things like that. So the cash flow can just be really nice for something like that. So it's kind of like two forces colliding that is very Airbnb investor friendly, because you got cheaper real estate because people don't want to invest in long-term rental, type properties there.
Mhm.
But you have the bonus of Airbnb, which not everyone's necessarily doing, especially at something like a 12 unit. And so those two things colliding can make for some pretty nice deals.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's very interesting. You also mentioned some passive investments where you're participating in. Any criteria that you think about there as you're making decisions on those?
I think knowing the sponsor's good. The sponsor I'd invested with, I'd known him for a while. And the deal, I would say the deal isn't necessarily going according to plan exactly. Like, have
Oh,
struggled a little bit with occupancy, but I also have seen them like working hard. Like, they've gone through different property managers. They're not just letting it die. Like, they're working hard. Even if it doesn't exactly hit the returns, I'm still going to be doing much better, which I think the projected returns was like 19% IRR. I'm going to be doing much better than if that money was invested into any paper asset class like the stock market, and things like that. So even if it's a little bit less, now it could end up being even better than the projections. But it had some struggle, but I would say know the sponsor, know that they're going to work hard for you, because I don't mind failures as long as you're going to work through it and figure it out. To me, the biggest failure is just like, screw it, sell it, it ain't working. Okay, let's figure out how to try to make it work here and see if we can have a plan B, plan C, make it happen. To me, that's just entrepreneurship anyway. Like a good businessman is just a problem solver. And so I like seeing people that are able to do that. Kind of had that track record, some failures, things that they've overcome, and you just kind of know the sponsor and have built good trust with them and things like that.
That's extremely interesting, because I'm thinking that what gives you that confidence? Was it a level of communication that sponsor gave you about what was happening? Because you seem very calm that this isn't going as expected, and confident about it, which I think is probably a testament to your mindset going in as well. But there's probably something there from the sponsor that's helping and making you feel comfortable.
Yeah. Well, one, I did my own everyone should have a basic level of kind of underwriting and seeing, okay, are these comps actual good comps and things like that. So I had kind of done my own due diligence, and I was like, okay, these numbers seem pretty good. And I say it's not going as good as according to plan. It's fine. It's cash flowing. It's just not where I guess it was expected to be. So yeah, there's a mixture of doing my own due diligence, and then I'd been around these people for a while, so I'd kind of watch them from a distance, I guess, seeing them in action, and seeing what they were doing, seeing how almost if you're going to invest money with someone, you want someone all into syndication, probably not necessarily in different avenues. And so they were all in. I mean, it was just someone that I had kind of trusted. I like humility in people. I also like people being honest. Humility, I think, comes that, and you could see that from the investor reports and things like that. And they would call me and dude, we're good. Obviously they're working hard for me. They're probably, I like a sponsor who almost is more stressed out than you are. Like they care about your money just as much as you do. And and I think I'm kind of the same way. Like we raise money on this Airbnb deal, and it's like, this is the biggest deal. Like this, I don't care where my money's at. This one has to be successful, when I'm playing with not playing, but investing other people's money. So I think that's a big responsibility. And I like feeling like other people understand that responsibility.
Yeah, 100%. We've done, I think now over 200 plus of these passive real estate investments for some of our clients. We spreadsheet every one of them out, and there's a couple in there that aren't performing up to, again, very similar to the story you told, where it's like, okay, it's cash flowing, but not performing up to value. Man, I sweat every one of those out, right? Because I don't think it's acceptable, right? And so I'm constantly working with the sponsors to try and see how we can improve that. And then everyone listen at the passive investors out there who aren't doing their due diligence, and I've seen LinkedIn post on this, and I'm not calling anyone out, but you know who you are, who said, hey, if you're passive, you don't do any work on it or any of the underwriting. Do some homework on here and make sure you understand what you're investing in. Some basic level of underwriting that that this thing makes sense. We're obviously doing a lot more work for our investors than that. But my gosh, yes, something. So you can at least verify some of the assumptions that you see on the page. That would be a good place to start. And a comment I made on LinkedIn back at somebody was, I've watched a lot of smart people in my lifetime make some really bad decisions. And so that can always be there. You can always trust somebody, but maybe not on this one. Maybe they got this one wrong. So do your own homework.
Yeah. Yeah. And the only thing I guess I'll add is just with talking about the sponsors and the homework, to me, just as much the due diligence is on the numbers, the due diligence is on the sponsors, because to be honest, if you have a great deal and the numbers look great, if you don't have a successful sponsor, like someone who's going to figure problems out, because problems just are naturally going to happen. A fire's insurance claim is going to happen. Something's going to happen. And I would rather have something, maybe call it 15% returns with a strong sponsor than 19% returns with a questionable, not as strong sponsor. Not like their character's bad, but it's like, okay, this dude, he knows what he's doing. He's experienced in the game. They make it happen. because their underwriting is probably pretty conservative too, because they've been through different flaws and failures in their previous
Mm-hmm.
deals. And so a good sponsor is worth just as much as like the numbers in a spreadsheet that it's going to pull out for you.
We get asked which one's more important, and I don't have an answer for that because they're absolutely equal to me on every single deal that we look at. Does the sponsor make sense? Does the deal make sense? And thereof,
True.
if one doesn't check out, then hey, we're going to pass on this one. We'll wait for the next one. But they are of equal importance. So yeah, spot on, man. Same way we're thinking about stuff too, as we're sort of looking at this. This has been great. I want to be mindful of your time. Anything else you want to leave the listeners with? Where can they find you and learn more about you? So many things going on.
Yeah. So your audience, I mean, if they want to reach out to me, they can definitely reach out on LinkedIn. If they're a younger audience and are interested in the podcast, we're on, all the social media at Money Vision U like university. So they can, I love if anyone has questions, especially not to be ageist or anything, but I love answering young people's questions because I love the hunger with them, or if somebody has questions about real estate, things like that. I love helping young people. So feel free to reach out with any questions on, my Instagram at Money Vision U, or if you want to, get with me directly, LinkedIn, you can reach out there as well.
You might get questions from our 90-year-old investors asking how to explain this stuff to, their 16-year-old grandkids. That might happen. That could be a real thing.
Hopefully I can help fill some of that void fill some of that role for them, help them out. Cause it takes a village to raise a kid.
100%. I can agree on that. Stuart, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, Brandon, thanks for having me.
All right, then. Thank you everyone for listening. We'll see you next time.